What is happening out there, Roto Scouts basketball fans? If you know me well, you know I had a slight second there where I wasn't entirely sure if I had turned on the microphone. Saw me glance down. It was on. Good news. Hopefully, whoever's out there can actually hear me. I'm pretty sure you can. We are all systems go here. A couple people already in the door hanging out for a quick little basketball show. Shouldn't be too complicated. These always go a little bit easier. It's easier to knock out a basketball slate in like an hour, especially when we only got 4 games to talk about. But I tell you what, just looking at this slate, a lot more interesting at the top end than last night's was. You know, we had a big day yesterday, but we kind of topped out in what was it, like, the 50, mid 50s kind of a range. I feel like 56, I want to say, was the top end projection yesterday. Number of superstars on the slate pushing that top end average up. Several guys in the mid 50s, a couple of 60-point projections on the board today. A lot to work with for a 4-gamer and some interesting matchups too. Should be fun to talk through. Got the Sims run. We're up and running now. Day 3. We're on top of it. Got the rotations built for every team now. We're getting the teams we haven't seen yet. 3 of the 4 games include teams that we haven't seen yet. Or, I'm sorry, all of the games include a team we haven't seen yet because Boston and Minnesota are not playing one another, but they did play already. So, second game for each of those teams. So, we've got a little bit of info. Boston obviously lit up my New York Knicks in their opener. Jason Tatum had a monster 61.8 FanDuel points in 30 and a third minutes. Didn't even play into the mid 30s to get there. Just a monster day. They shot something like going into the third quarter, and then they started chasing the record for 3-point attempts, the franchise record, or for 3-point makes rather. And they missed like 10 in a row to kind of screw up what their percentage looked like for the game. They were shooting 60% from 3 for a big chunk of that game. I'm not sure exactly where it finished. But presumably that comes down by 20, 25 points over the course of time, but a great opportunity for the Celtics to look just absolutely fantastic and just completely wax this pretty bad Washington team tonight. So I think we're going right back to the well with some of the top end there. They're a deep team. They've got a lot to work with. Again, we do have a couple of guys projected into the 60s with both Jokic and Luka on the slate. We've got Wemby on the slate. SGA is drawing a decent projection, but not really pulling a ton of ownership in the sim run that I did. And then a really solid mid-range. Again, for a slate with only 4 games, we've got a lot to work with from, like, if you just look at the rows there, like, row 8 with Anthony Edwards, 7 with Domantas Sabonis, all the way down through Klay Thompson on, like, 26. A lot of viability through those guys, and then we get into some of the value plays, and there's a lot to work with, so should be an interesting one to go through. Andy's here. Good afternoon, pal. Tizzle Man's here. Cujo Blue, ducking. What's going on, guys? Anybody hit anything last night? I assume we did not have a great night collectively last night. It was an awful night for the industry at large last night. I don't know if there was a site out there that like nailed everything. Obviously some of the bigger sites just had people float to the top just based on volume. But man, a lot of the big picks of the day really underwhelmed yesterday. So it was a brutal day across the industry, brutal day in our numbers for sure. A lot of the players that we talked about did not come through, but right back to the well. That's why they call it a grind, So right back into the fray with this one. And we've got, again, pretty good looking slate here. Celts and the Wizards, a 232.5 point total in that one, but Boston 14-point favorites on the road. We did see, a perfect example of Tatum, like I was saying in the run-up, Tatum in just 30 minutes put up a 60-point game against the Knicks, who are allegedly a fantastic defensive team. They were not getting out and defending the 3 at all. I think they're missing some of their, with Mitch out, and I know they're missing some of their rim defense. I think that had an impact on just their defensive scheming. So Celtics were bombing from 3. They should have the opportunity to do the same thing again against the Wizards, and the Wizards aren't going to be able to stop them no matter where they're trying to get their buckets. Definitely fourth quarter upside for some of the down bench guys from the Celtics. Not many pieces on either site of the Wizards really came through. There's a couple of guys who project okay, like are who they are kind of opportunities, but they're a low end team, and against the field, we really weren't getting much of them in my first glance at the sim results. Reconfigured Spurs team, they look a little bit different. They've got some missing pieces also tonight, but they've got the big man Wemby, obviously phenomenal. The ridiculous points per minute, the ridiculous, completely ludicrous ceiling. As I said throughout all of last year, the numbers that we saw last year are the worst he's ever going to be in the NBA, and he was amazing in a per minute sense. So, I mean, fantastic fantasy performer. You can go there all day long. Going up against the Mavs, they're 8.5-point dogs on the road in Dallas, 228-point total. Obviously, the Mavs with some big guns on their side. We'll definitely do some talking about Luka and Kyrie and down on through the list there. OKC, Denver, highlight game. Oops. I just realized I forgot to change the abbreviations. These aren't lookups. This is just copied across from the sheet. So I changed the team names and the totals, but I forgot to change the abbreviation. So ignore these. But OKC and Denver, 2-point spread. Denver favored at home, but a very tight point spread. No Isaiah Hartenstein for OKC. That's an impact to them for sure going up against Denver. 227.5-point total, though, and a close point spread. I think we can get to pieces on both sides of that game. But again, SGA didn't really come up, not nearly as much as I thought. I thought we'd at least get into the upper mid single digits and have some. We really got very, very little. So we'll give him some consideration. Jokic obviously looks tremendous and a lot of pieces to work with in that game. And then rounding things out, Minnesota and Sacramento. Just a 1-point spread in that game as well. Sacramento 1-point dogs at home. Good pieces on either side of this one. Julius Randle really kind of underwhelmed in a good chunk of time in his first game. Anthony Edwards didn't really have a highlight game. Just put up right around a point per minute. We'll look at it on the other screen in a sec. But definitely tremendous upside on the Minnesota side with some of those guys. And then Sacramento, a couple stars. They're like B-plus kind of stars with Sabonis and Fox. They're good, but there's a lot of other star caliber players I'd rather pay up for on a lot of slates. We'll see how they math out on this one. But definitely a good mix of games here. Some couple of competitive ones, potential blowout where we could get to some depth, but we also like the ceiling. And then just kind of a mid game with that San Antonio Dallas where it's just like you play the kind of obvious guys. If you weren't here yesterday, the new columns that you're seeing with the arrows here, these are telling us two things, basically. It's two different measurements, and it's trying to capture a directional, are we above or below the projected field ownership that this ran against, and then by how much. So the degrees of how much are told to you by the color shading and the direction of the arrow, like this up and to the right with a light green, as compared to like this straight up with a darker green. And those will get darker and darker, like this dark red with a straight down arrow on Jordan Poole, who we got 15% of on FanDuel, but looks like he's going to be absurdly popular. We got none of on DraftKings is significant. SGA stands out for the big red down arrow, 4.67%. We still did get a little bit of them. 5%'s not nothing for 9,900 on DraftKings. But that's well below the field. Field is at like 3x, roughly. So SGA came up well below for us in this version of the sim. Stream was freezing up for you, Demon That? It might have just been a blip on either your end or my end, but let me know, guys, if anything's coming through haywire. If you can't hear me, see me, or all of those things, definitely shout it out in the chat. If you catch news, I know Power's good on the news. Haven't seen him in here yet today, but I'm sure he'll drop by. I forgot to break that down, actually. We are really only waiting on one piece, and that's Sammy Hauser from the Celtics is listed as questionable. Otherwise, we've just got a long list of outs. I mentioned Isaiah Hartenstein. Kristaps Porzingis is still out. Sadiq Bey, Malcolm Brogdon, Devin Vassell, which is a biggie for San Antonio. Kessler Edwards, Dante Exum, Devin Carter, Hartenstein, Nikola Topic, Jalen Williams, and Kenrich Williams. Jalen with a Y. But as far as the questionables, other than the unknown unknowns right now, which could be, who the hell knows, Chris Paul scratched old, it could be one of those kind of things that comes down on night one and surprises us with some of these teams. But as far as the known unknowns right now, it's just Sam Hauser questionable. So not a lot to sweat there. We'll be on top of all the starting lineups. It's one of the reasons I wanted to be on it as early as I could, which turned out to be 4:45. But if you weren't here for previous shows the last couple of days, definitely going to try and push this earlier in the day as we get into the season and keep it 3 o'clock, somewhere in that range. But we'll see how it goes. You guys know me. Come on back to later on. Probably going to be 6:30ish. I'm going to try and jump on for a showdown show. I'm like 90% sure that that's actually going to happen. Just a matter of actually getting up and done and getting everything together. But keep an eye on the notifications. Good reason to subscribe down below. Hit the like button as we get started. Check out rotoscouts.com. Every single subscription under $1 a day for full access. Today we've got a biggie. We've got basketball for the 4-gamer. We've got a 9-game hockey slate, and we've got a showdown slate for football. So for under $1 a day, you get access to all of that. You get access to basketball, hockey tomorrow. You get access to NFL through the weekend, basketball and hockey through the weekend, World Series baseball. I'll project the World Series games. I know I usually don't project the 1-gamers, but it's the series. Why not? There's probably some decent prize pools up. Big World Series. I know a lot of people are hating on it, but I mean, what more could you want from a World Series than featuring easily 2 of the 5 best teams in baseball, easily 6 of the 10 best players in baseball? Like, who cares about the payrolls? Like, get into it, man. It's going to be a fun series. The 2 biggest stars in baseball, legitimately the 2 best hitters of the last 10, 15 years. One of the generation's best hitters in Juan Soto. Number of guys that aren't far behind. Great pitching. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a great series. And it's a historic rivalry. Don't forget, the Dodgers are technically a New York City team. It just goes back a ways. Closing in on 100 years ago. But there's rivalry there. There's history there. Makes it fun. Powers here. There he is. Puka News throws a wrench into the whole joint as far as the football game. Yeah, Puka Nacua active tonight if you didn't see it. Have we seen news on Hawkinson yet? I had them both in, but I noted that those 2 guys were question marks. So we'll dive into that later on. But let's dig in on the basketball slate. I'm going to go position by position like we typically do. I'm going to make it the full just guards to try and capture more of the multi-position so that we're not bouncing around too much. So for anybody new, FanDuel over here on the left where it's blue, some stats and per minute numbers in the middle here, and then DraftKings on the right over here where it's green, and then some additional stats off to the right over there that will take or leave. Hawkinson's out. All right, thanks, EB. Do I have the... No, I closed that. All right. Let me actually just... nobody's going to be building lineup right now. We'll update that after the show. So let's get into some hoops. And I guess just starting from the top by projection, we could go top 150 exposure and do it that way. Or like best exposure against the field. Of course, Excel doesn't want a sword for me now. I have to optimize this sheet. There's a function in here that can optimize these things for you and get rid of a lot of unnecessary formatting. Because right now this is... There you go. All right, this is probably the better way to do it. And it does give us a lot of order to our against the field as well, because it's just our top 150 exposure. So sorted by top 150. Alex Caruso, pretty significant piece on both sites. We're getting to him a little bit more on FanDuel. 60% of the top 150 is only 5,300 over there. Shooting guard only. It's 0.92 per minute player last season on just 14.6% usage. Defensive monster, a perfect pickup for that OKC team. Really solid overall player. Fits into the slate really well. We're getting to him aggressively above the field, so definitely looks like one of our key players on the FanDuel side. And then we're getting to him a little bit above the field on the DraftKings slate. 44.6% of our top 150. He is a key piece on both. He's got shooting guard and small forward eligibility on that DraftKings slate for just 4,800. A lot of upside there. 0.89 per minute on DraftKings. Got him in the... Got him right in that range, right around what he averaged last season as far as the overall projection for those not doing the math in their heads. So Caruso looks like a key piece from not a bargain basement value type of a guy, but a solidly priced mid-range guy who's probably a couple $100 cheap on both sites. Luka Doncic, monster price tag at 11.9 on FanDuel, 11.1 on DraftKings, but you see it doesn't really impact the exposure. 22% exposure in the top 150, a little bit above the field on FanDuel. You know, a little again, this is probably telling us that the field is maybe 18, 20%. I can look it up. But looking it up is cheating. And I want to try and convey it in the way that you guys got to figure it out. Let's see. One of these days I'll crack ownership and just have my own and be able to show it on these shows, but that day is not today. That's even lower than I thought. It's about 5 points lower than what I said. So, decent upside on FanDuel for Luka. You know, that puts us less than 10 points ahead of the field, but closing in on 10 points ahead of the field, I'd have no problem pressing the gas pedal down on that. He's one of the monster point per minute players on the slate, 1.64 FanDuel points per minute on 35.5% usage last year. He's ridiculous. On DraftKings, 36%. Looks like we came in right around the field, maybe a couple points above the field, but close to where they're at, 1.71 per minute on DraftKings. Absolutely tremendous. One of our 60-point projected players with obvious ceiling. 100-point games are in play for Luka, and that's not true of a lot of players in the league. Malik Monk crashing the top of the board on DraftKings, 36%, way rocketing to the top of the above the field ratings over there. I would imagine among the guards, that looks like it's our highest as far as relates to the field. What was his? Yeah, the field's fairly high on him, but we're higher. We're closing in on, we're not double the field, but we're closing in on double the field at that level with Monk. 5,000, spread him across shooting guard and small forward. Decent enough option. He's a shooting guard, point guard on the FanDuel slate at 5,700. We just got him kind of level with the field at 11% ownership. That puts us right at the field where it's a dead straight arrow and yellow. Looks like we had a little less of the field of Kyrie Irving than the field did for 8,100 shooting guard and point guard eligible on FanDuel. Kyrie's great, 1.22 FanDuel points per minute, 27.4% usage. You know, plenty of upside for him playing alongside Luka. There are new mouths to feed. They got to figure out the way that's going to work for Dallas these days. But Kyrie's one of the true upside players on that team and one of the true upside players of the slate. We got plenty of him. It's just we are lighter than the field. Field's checking in on him. It's like the third highest owned player. That's actually not that far off. It's below the field, but it's not crazy below. So if you're right around level on FanDuel on Kyrie, I think you're okay. It's probably the same thing given how that looks on DraftKings, around 35%. A more significant piece on DK, but not like massively more. He's only 7,500 over there, point guard and shooting guard eligible, 1.25 points per minute. We got plenty of them. Again, 35%, but that's probably... I think I just gave you the DraftKings number before. We'll swing back. Yeah, so we're a handful of points away from it here. But it's not nuts. Koulibaly didn't get him on FanDuel. 3.96 value share for 5,400 is a shooting guard only. On DraftKings, he's 42. You can get him at shooting guard and small forward. Just a 0.71 per minute player last year, but he's showing a nice value mark. We got to him at 30.6% in our top 150, so pretty significant exposure. A little bit above the field. Definitely a reasonable option that you're going to want to be at least locking in, some of those value shares. He's very, very cheap on that site. So he's just a guy, he's a building block, right? That's guys like him at 42, guys like Caruso at 48 even $5,000 Malik Monk. You just layer those guys in because they help you unlock the access to the other pieces that you need, and that just builds the foundation of those lineups. So don't get uncomfortable when those guys start to get highly exposed. It's just you do have to consider sometimes the limitation of upside. So it depends on what you're looking at them for. You don't want to miscast them in a role where it's like, all right, it's a 0.71 per minute player, but I need him to come out here and put up 0.95 for me tonight so that I'll be able to math out to the value that I need. That's the wrong way to play a player like that. But if you're just plugging him in for the value that he's presenting here, I think he's worth rostering a little bit ahead of the field. Peyton Pritchard could definitely see some upside for Boston. 4,200 on FanDuel, point guard only. Landed in 45% of the top 150 lineups. At 4,300 on DraftKings with point guard and shooting guard eligibility, he landed in 30%. That's more level with the field, where the FanDuel number's kind of gigantic against the field. He's projected for we're like half again on top of the ownership that he's projected for here. So a significant chunk of public ownership, but cut it in half and put that back on top, and that's where we land. So we want a little bit more Pritchard than the field, a little bit more Derek White than the field as well, and we actually ended up with more Derek White than we did Peyton Pritchard. White's a different play, 33 minutes projected versus the 23 that Pritchard's projected for. Pritchard's a bench player and White's a starter, but we get a little bit of potential upside for Pritchard. For one, he's got a regular role, and for two, a little bit of upside in the blowout in the fourth quarter run. Played 25 the other night, put up just a disappointing 12.8 FanDuel points, but does have 0.88 per minute upside from last year. Derek White, 1.01 per minute, just on 18.3% usage, but a guy who makes a lot of things happen out there for fantasy scoring. We got a ton of White on DraftKings as well, 6,600 at both guard spots, but we actually got him a little bit below the field, but despite having him 28% of the time, probably puts the field in the mid-30s kind of a range. Definitely a strong play, 1.02 per minute. Good facilitator, excellent player, gets his hands on the ball a lot in Boston. Put up 36.6 FanDuel points in 26.5 minutes the other night. That's perfect value there. Chris Paul at 66, I'm just kind of meh. 1.01 per minute last year. That's fine for the money. It's not a rush out and roster it spot. But he's always going to give you a little bit of Chris Paul assist upside, especially if he's just throwing lobs to the big man. So I like the fit for him there as just a kind of the old Admiral coming to town. And the Admiral's a wrong name to use in San Antonio. Jeez, I can't do that. But the old veteran coming to town and just trying to push some experience onto the next generation superstar on his way out the door, and give him some good point guard guidance and show him what a good point guard can do for a big man in the NBA. And I think that's exactly why they brought Chris Paul here. But through that, he's going to succeed. Got him around the field, 16% on FanDuel. Got him around the field, 25% for 5,900 on DraftKings. Drew Holiday, right around a point per minute in the debut the other night. It's a medium strength play. 20% right around the field on, or 26% right around the field on FanDuel. 22% again right around the field on DraftKings. Puts up a 5+ value mark on DK. That's pretty good. Just under 5 on FanDuel. I'd want him a little bit less over here. One of the, in my mind, at 0.89 per minute on lower usage, 16.1% usage is compared to a little bit more usage for Derek White and a completely different price point and role for Peyton Pritchard. I do think it makes sense that Drew comes up a little bit below where those guys are. And in a blowout, you might see his minutes or his output at least diminished a little bit. But definitely a good player on a short slate. Devo, looks like we got a little bit extra Devo, 18%, little slight bit above where the field was going into this one. He was a 0.96 per minute player last season. We know he's a 3-point bomber, needs to hit his threes. First game, just 23.1 FanDuel points in 31.6 minutes. Not great output. Why is Chris Paul getting a first game stats there? That's weird. The Spurs haven't played, right? The hell is that measuring against? Branham's getting him too. Maybe it's pulling from last year, or I don't know. Curious now. Yeah, it's keeping it from, so that download kept the last game that those guys played last year for whatever reason. But it didn't do that for a lot of these other teams. That's really weird. Anyway, ignore the teams that haven't played when they land in this column, obviously. Chris Paul did not just do that the other day. Would have been disappointing if he had. But Devo, definitely, that's an underwhelming game. But if he's on fire, if he's making his threes, and he should have every opportunity to take them. That's why they brought him there, is to play perimeter defense and hit threes. And they're going to set it up for him to be able to do that. 22% of them on the DraftKings slate, slightly below the field. But it's a player I'm happy enough to take even with the field. He's a fair mid-market guy, 5,200 both guard spots on DK. A little bit more expensive at 57, but small forward and shooting guard, so a differentiated piece from a lot of these other players that we're talking about positionally. Jamal Murray, just fine. 16% of them, that's across 150, top 150 lineups, it's fine. Same thing on DraftKings, 15%, but it's a lot lower against the field on DK. That's an undercut to the field pretty significantly, it looks like, on the DraftKings slate. Not as big as this one. Not as big as the SGA one, but that's a fairly significant undercut for the 7,300. Over here, just kind of level with the field. And I'm fine with that. 1.22 per minute on FanDuel last season in 59 games, 1.25 on DK. There's definitely upside when he's in the sevens. You could get a ceiling game out of Murray. Tough defensive game, though. That game's going to be a little bit grindy. A lot of guys came up a little bit under where they might otherwise have. Christian Brown, looks like we got a little bit of him. A little bit of Lou Dort. 28.6% of Lou Dort, so a little bit more of him than Christian Brown on the FanDuel slate. Even with the field in the mid-teens on both those guys on DraftKings, both presenting decent value, shooting guard and small forward eligible, 44, 4,500. 30-minute projections for both guys is definitely a little bit of playability in them. The issue is they're not super high ceiling guys. Both Brown and Lou Dort are 15% usage guys based on last year, 0.81 and 0.73 per minute on FanDuel, 0.81, 0.74 per minute on DraftKings. So again, it's just a mostly collectors of fantasy points, guys that you just kind of have to monitor how much ceiling you truly need out of those guys. Am I just buying a value square, or am I putting a guy in where I would need some ceiling because I put 3 other value guys in who aren't going to give me ceiling? So just be aware of who you're playing these guys with, but they're both easily playable in the mid-teens and kind of around the field, with Lou Dort on FanDuel looking like the best spot against the field. Starting to thin out exposure-wise on DraftKings, couple differentiated players on the FanDuel side. We get to 12% exposure, 12% exposure on Julian Strawther for just 3,200. That's slightly below the field. Field's probably in the 15 range. It's another low-end guy. I've only got him for 14 fantasy points in 20 minutes, and he could play less than that, 0.79 per minute last season. Kind of a meh option on DK. Didn't get him at all on FanDuel. We got a bunch of Anthony Edwards on FanDuel, 22.67%. That looks like it's more than the field. Again, a disappointing game, 34.7 FanDuel points in 41.1 minutes on the slate the other night. That was just a 2-gamer, so it might have still mathed out to be one of the better spots in that position. But for the salary he was pulling, probably wasn't in a lot of winning lineups. And you need Anthony Edwards when he's coming in the 9s or above to be a well over point per minute player. He was 1.21 last year on 30+% usage, 1.25 on FanDuel. So I think you go right back to the well with Ann on FanDuel. 10% of them did come in a little bit below the field on DraftKings. If you wanted to push that up to the field's ownership at 8,800, there's obviously a clear, monstrous ceiling there. And he is actually pulling a 5+ value mark. That's why he's getting a little attention on DraftKings. Darren Fox, 8% level with the field on DK. Didn't get him at all on FanDuel. 4% well below the field on SGA, as mentioned. That's our biggest player, biggest name brand that's coming in significantly below the field. Field on DK on SGA. Roughly, call it like 3+ times that. In the mid-teens, mid to high teens. I wouldn't mind getting still undercutting, but maybe pushing that up to like 10 just to buy his raw ceiling on a somewhat short slate. No issues with that. We got significantly more Jaylen Brown for the 82. By the way, SGA on FanDuel is 11.3 versus the 9.9 that he costs on DraftKings. Monster price difference. We only got like 1 share of him on the FanDuel slate, so, and he's not really a big factor on the FanDuel slate. Jaylen Brown looks like a much bigger impact. He put up 34.9 in just under 30 minutes the other night. 1.13 per minute player last year, 1.15 on DraftKings. A lot less of them on DK, just around 3% against the field. That's a little bit lower than the field, but that probably puts the field in the 10-12 range. 8,200 over there versus the same price against the higher FanDuel cap. Gives him a little advantage over here. Again, he's probably right around 25%, and I'm perfectly happy to have that. Looks like we got some Nickeil Alexander-Walker, a little bit of Russ Westbrook that I really don't like. 4,800, he does have a little value, but I mean, you can see it's below a 5 value rating. We're getting him below the field, fortunately. I'm happy about the undercut to the field. I guess the field's getting a little carried away with Russ Westbrook shares. But that's still 25%, not insignificant for Russ. Outside of that, Jordan Poole's the outlier down here on FanDuel. 14%, but still pretty hard against the field, hard below the field. Perfectly fine with that. Again, anybody from this Washington team that you just kind of want to forgo in what's going to be a complete blowout, I really don't have issues with it. Poole's the highest projected player on that team, or second highest projected player on that team. He's pulling mid-teens level ownership on DraftKings, and we did not get to him as our biggest undercut, I would think, by far, or at least our most emphatic undercut. And then on FanDuel, he's pulling a monster, like 3-ish times, a little bit under 3 times that projection. I'm perfectly happy to be under on him. Give me 15% Jordan Poole. I'll take it. If he goes off against the Boston Celtics tonight and ruins my day, so be it. He's a .97 per minute player last season. .03 the year before. I'm fine not having it. See what you guys are talking about. Ton of white. That's how you have all this energy. No, I have the... I'm more into the green that saps your energy. Makes it so that you don't want to sit here doing this stuff. Sammy Hauser ruled out. All right, thanks, Tiz. So that just it points us toward, a little bit of depth angle on the Celts. Where did I have Sammy? So that opens up. That was 21 minutes. So we push a decent chunk of that in the, let's see. Tillman's going to go from 12 into the high teens, low 20s. And then I'll probably just move some pieces around with the back-end guys like Walsh and Ketta. I don't know that there's one specific spot outside of Tillman that's going to get a big chunk of it because, everybody else is just kind of getting their straightforward upside minutes. It's only 20 to spread around anyway. Is there anybody I didn't project that should be getting a chunk of it? Yeah, keep an eye on the next update that goes through, but it's a little bit of minor movement. Sammy again was projected for 21 minutes and 16 and change, 17 and change fantasy points, so it's a minor impact, but maybe it creates a little upside opportunity. Tillman just 3,800, but center only on FanDuel is meh. 3,600 power forward center on DraftKings. Talk about it in a sec. Yeah, I think so, Tez. Again, it's like if you're looking for anybody that it has like a direct potential impact on the game, as far as if he got a few more minutes, that's a potential spot. But I'll think it through more. It's early in the season. I want to make sure I got all the pieces straight. Be better at the spot checks later in the season, I promise. So that was down through the bottom of the guard position here. So Poole's your biggie outlier. SGA is the big superstar outlier across the guards. Jump over to forwards. That's also possible, Power. Just something dumb like more minutes for the starters and the bench does the same, even though a massive blowout. Could be. So, Mr. Tatum, speaking of, looks just tremendous on DraftKings to me. We got him 51% of the top 150 lineups. Monster upside, one of the top players as compared to the field. You get him. You got a pretty decent chunk of Alex Caruso, who we talked about already. Looks like we've got Malik Monk, who we talked about already. And then down here, as a value play, Jeremy Sohan, as meh as that might be, landed in 62% of the DraftKings lineups and has, again, one of the monster against the field marks, it looks like. On FanDuel, looks like Randall is more in that role. A higher upside player, no doubt about it, than Sohan is. Nobody else really crashing FanDuel. Look at that. We're like level with the field. A little bit of advantage maybe gained in some of these spots. But that's surprising. A lot of just level straightforward with the field across the two forward positions. A couple of these guys are centers on FanDuel, but forwards on DK, so I got to be aware of that. So Tatum, again, 60 plus on the FanDuel scale in just over 30 minutes. Monster upside. He was a 1.29 player last year, 1.34 on DraftKings. Not much to be said to have to sell Jason Tatum. You just play him because he's so damn good. Major upside in a blowout, even if he plays 30 minutes or thereabouts. I see no way that Washington really keeps this competitive, so you're probably going to have him sitting the second part of the fourth quarter at the absolute least, and maybe the entire fourth quarter. But that probably does mean that he's in the 50s. It probably means he's approaching at least his medians here, and at his medians, he's been pretty decent with a little bit of upside. 35-ish% on FanDuel, level with the field, a 5+ value mark. 51% way over the field. 5.6 value mark is one of the higher ones on the entire slate for a high price player. And honestly, only 9,300 on DraftKings. That's like it's a high price, but he's 200 less than Domantas Sabonis. I'm pretty sure that Jason Tatum is better than Domantas Sabonis. Not necessarily, I guess, in points per minute last year, 134 versus 141. Should look before I say these things, but that doesn't feel like a correct pricing to me. Jaylen Brown birthday narrative. The narrative being he's hungover, says Tiz. Is it his birthday? I was unaware of that. Not something I chase. Not something I think is worth chasing. Every now and then you do see it come through, but I think it's more just happenstance on whatever. It's nothing you can project. Monk we've talked about already. So Sabonis himself, I just accidentally took him down a peg, but 10.6.7% ownership in the top 150 on DraftKings. A little bit less than the field. It probably puts the field in the 12-15% range. He's a good player. I didn't mean to take him away. 9,500 power forward and center eligible, 33.4% assist rate and 19.2% rebounding rate last season, 63.7% true shooting. Again, 1.41 DraftKings points per minute on FanDuel is 1.38 on just 22% usage. Does a lot on the court, key player for them, but he's under a 5 value rating on FanDuel, just slightly above a 5 value rating on DK. So again, if you're putting these guys head to head, take the guy who's projecting out better for a little bit less, even though he's highly owned. Bilal Coulibaly on the other side of that game for Washington. Didn't get him on FanDuel. 21-ish projection. He's only a 0.72 per minute player there. Oh, we talked about him. I forgot. He's guard eligible. 0.71 though. Again, it's just a limited upside player. Just to put that point back on it. But we did get him 30% of the time because he's only 4,200. So he's one of those value slot fillers, those building block type players. Randall, again, this is disappointing output for Julius Randle. Under a point per minute. He's a 1.17 per minute player last year, 1.23 the year before, or on DraftKings, rather. That was, I almost said the year before because he only played 46 games last season. But when he's healthy, a high-end player who is honestly a little bit underpriced. 7,300 on FanDuel is what's pushing all that ownership in our top 150 and our exposure against the field. 7,800 on DraftKings. I still think he's well worth getting to. Power forward and center eligible. He's got a 5+ value rating on the board. We got to him 12-13% of the time. It's about level with the field, maybe slightly above. Randall, I mention it basically every time he comes up. He is an underrated facilitator, and I think the connection with him and AE is going to be pretty strong. 21.7% assist rate last year, 12.8% rebounding, 56.9% true shooting. Randall just needs to get his feet under him, and he'll be fine. This wasn't a bad game. It was just an underwhelming game because he did get the minutes we were looking for. Chet, center only on FanDuel, power forward and center on DraftKings. Looks like we didn't really get him as a major factor on either site. He's just fine. 1.26 per minute on FanDuel, 1.22 on DraftKings. We got him more on the FanDuel side, 11.3% in the single center spot. So he's a center worth considering. That is a bigger share than we got of Domantas Sabonis at the center only position. It's a bigger share than we got of Al Horford. And then we'll look at the other centers when they come up. But it's not insignificant. It's just level with the field, and I suspect there's a big center lurking out there. On the DK side, just 4% and a little bit below the field. Medium strength kind of a play. Fits up better on FanDuel based on the scoring as well. Kuzma, I think we've all gotten there with Kuz over time. 29.5% usage last year, 115 FanDuel per minute, 120 DraftKings points per minute. Notably, again, another Washington player that we just got none of on DraftKings. I don't really have issue with that. It looks like it's, our 0 is a little bit below the field. That doesn't make sense. Oh, yes, it does. What am I saying? 0 below the field? Yeah, that makes sense. The field is at low single digits. So that's correctly reflecting that. Way below the field on DraftKings, it looks like, on Jalen Williams. Very good player, 1.07 DraftKings points per minute last year. Or 1.09, rather. We did get him 11% of the time. Definitely not a guy you'd want to skip. But it looks like we're coming up about a third of the field's ownership. 6,900 both forward spots. Looks like he's probably just getting boxed out by values up here. Again, he's not a bad play. He's a 5+ value rating, and we did get him 11% of the time. But that's a hard undercut by about a third. The field is 3 times higher. We got him at about that level on FanDuel, which is about level with the field. Had I noticed that, I could have just said he's getting on around where he is on FanDuel. DeMar DeRozan under the field and just 6% on FanDuel. Under the field, just 0.67%, just one couple shares on DK. 7,800 both forward spots, 8,000 both forward spots. I'm fine with him in a couple of lineups, but he's nowhere near a priority play. Just kind of an average player, 1.07 per minute. Does spike upside when the mid-range jumpers are falling and he's doing his thing out there, but those games are fewer and further between now. His price is probably going to come down during the course of the season, and maybe we'll consider him when he's in the, low to mid 7s on FanDuel. Right now, well under a 5 value rating on both sites. MPJ got a little bit of them right around the field on FanDuel. Same thing with Aaron Gordon. Same thing with Christian Brown, who we already talked about. All 3 of those guys got shares on both sites. Slightly, but close below, but close to the field on all those guys on the DraftKings slate. Slightly close to or slightly above the field in 12 to 16% ownership on all 3 guys on FanDuel. Feels about right. They're all going to see plenty of run. 0.94 per minute for both Porter and Gordon last year. 0.81 per minute for Christian Brown. The usage advantage goes to Porter. But Gordon's another big man who, in addition to his rebounding skills and just his explosive playmaking from time to time, he's also an underrated passer. 14.7% assist rate last year. He's not a bad facilitator. So I like getting to him because he can get games where he pads scoring a little bit by being a multi-category guy. So 14.6% over here, 12.6%, a little bit above the field. I have no problem being a few shares ahead of the field on Christian Brown. No problem being even honestly a little bit more ahead of the field on Aaron Gordon. On DK, it looks like it doesn't really work that way for 61. Power forward only on both sides. We got a little bit of a PJ Washington problem in here. Not my favorite. 5,600 power forward only on FanDuel. Sub 5. Mark for a value, but we're pulling 32.6 and more than the field over there. 46% of Nas. Almost certainly that's all in the power forward spot. That looks like it's somewhat ahead of the field. Both of these guys somewhat ahead of the field. Monster value number. If this comes down to a head-to-head for 500 less, even with 6 fewer minutes projected, give me Nas. Even in coming off of a disappointing 17.3 FanDuel points in 26 minutes the other night, 1.05 versus 0.87 per minute makes up that minutes gap already. So now you're just talking about a level play, and Nas looks like the better player. And we got him that way. 46% versus 32.6%, but both significant. Both around 20%, basically level with the field on DraftKings. Makes a lot of sense. 5,100 apiece. Power forward and center for Nas. Power forward only for PJ. Big mark here. Who's that? Oh, that's Sohan. Forgot about that. 0.91 per minute for Sohan last year. He was decent across the board. Okay, double-digit rebounding rate, 16.1% assists. The true shooting at 51.3% obviously needs some work. Made just 30% of his 3 3-pointers a game. He's just cheap. He's power forward only on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he's 5,800. I think you can completely bypass him. We did get him 10% of the time, or 9.3%. That's right around, maybe a little bit below the field. Not a super appealing player. Big Al, not really coming up. 1.3% on FanDuel, 9.3% on DraftKings. The DraftKings mark obviously more significant. 5,200 over there, power forward and center eligible. That gives him a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more utility to his game. 28 minutes, you could see that climb to 30. He might pick up a little bit of additional upside based on a little, some freed up minutes. I think I probably will move that up to 30, but we'll see. Just some open minutes to shuffle around. I don't think they want to burn Al out. He only played 26-1 in the blowout against the Knicks the other day, but put up 28 fantasy points right around, his upside pace. Lou Dort, 28.67% for just 4,600 on the FanDuel slate. Definitely interesting. I mentioned him before when we were talking about guards, but again, significant at both positions. 45 on DraftKings, 12% level with the field over there. That's Horford. All these guys are guard eligible. Got none of Jaden McDaniels on DK, but we did get 19%, basically level with the field on the FanDuel slate. Another guy who is a low-end point-per-minute player. Just 72 games last season, just 0.67 per minute. Put up basically that, 16 minutes the other night, 11.9 FanDuel points. Just cheap with some minutes upside. Got him projected at 29, could easily play 26, 28, 4,500. It seems like a stretch. Again, didn't come up at all for the 49 at small forward only on DraftKings. We did get 3,800 Julian Champagny in here. I was wondering where he was going to be. 33% exposure. I forgot to resort this. That's why it's all out of order. When I changed positions, I didn't resort it. 33% on Champagny hiding down here. That's basically level with the field, but that's a pretty sneaky little value play at 3,800. Or not sneaky, pretty effective just positional value play as a building block. Just a 0.76 per minute player last season. Mediocre stats across the board. We got a lot more of him on FanDuel, 35% and above the field on him. He's just under a 5 value rating, but only 3,900 at the small forward spot makes him a fairly appealing play. Sammy Hauser's off the board, so you can ignore the 17% he was pulling there and the 7% over there. Anybody interesting we missed? I don't think so. Harrison Barnes doesn't look like he's going to be much of a factor despite a 28-minute projection, 4% on DK, sub 1% exposure on FanDuel. Sub 3% on Aaron Wiggins. Wiggins is very cheap on DraftKings. I missed that one. 9.3% exposure there. That's not terrible. It's a little below the field. Feels probably 10, 12. But another guy, 15-point DK projection without a ton of believable ceiling. He's just cheap. And he's, I think, one of the lower-end cheap guys. But we did get him a little bit. It looks like the field's gotten a little bit further out, further overextended to him. Yeah, there's tons of upside for Pritchard today, Tez. My hope is that maybe people don't get him quite as much as they should. What am I sorted by here? There we go. Yeah, I mean, he was one of our top guys. But hopefully putting up half a fantasy point per minute the other night kind of scared people off. He was one of the underperformers for the Celts. I'm happy to sign up for that. But, I mean, he's going to be owned, but 30% right around the field on DK, 45% above the field on FanDuel. So that's where I really want to get invested. Let's pull up the center spot. Looks like we got them all on FanDuel. So, actually, you know what? Just want to do real quick. So among our center-only guys on FanDuel, which is always kind of a critical category, the big play, the bigger option is obviously Nikola Jokic, all the way at the top of the board, 22%, higher than the field. We also got more of Derek Lively against the field. Totally different plays. He's less than half the price. 5,400 though, that's an interesting enough buy for a 1.02 FanDuel point per minute player. He's not a high usage guy, 12% usage. you're just talking about scrappy points and a big-time collector of fantasy points, but a capable enough fantasy scorer. On DraftKings, he's only 4,700. Center only, 5.7 value rating, 42% of them way above the field. So that looks like an interesting value spot, a little bit more than just a slot him in because he's cheap kind of a guy. Can give you maybe not ceiling, but a truly decent, median score with a little bit more meat on the bone. Another half again on top, a standard deviation on top is typically. So Lively 18%, and then a little bit of a mix. We talked about Chet being a viable option, but he's the lower owned out of the obvious names, right? Those are the three obvious names, I think, and Sabonis. So Sabonis is actually the lowest owned, then Chet, and then Rudy pops a little bit, 16.6% on FanDuel. He's got a 5+ value rating for just 7,400. We know Rudy's game is primarily revolves around defense and stocks and rebounding and a light scorer. 15.2% usage rate, but definitely a collector and a very good one of fantasy points with significant ceiling upside on the right day. So I don't mind the Rudy shares, but if I'm building like one lineup on FanDuel, I'm definitely going to try and put Jokic in it. I think it's pretty clear as a 60-point projection with monstrous 1.68 per minute upside. That's the guy that you truly want, and we did get him above the field. So to me, that tells me if I'm building one, that's my center. On DraftKings, by the way, 34% Jokic, right around the field. No issues if you want to juice that a little bit and go beyond the field. It's Jokic. Getting the rest of these guys in the mix. So we got 34% Jokic right around the field. We got Wemby. He's center only on DraftKings, but he's power forward and center on FanDuel. So we got both him and Jokic above the field on FanDuel. That's an expensive proposition, though. 11.5 for Wemby, 11.7 for Jokic. Little bit of a discount on DraftKings, maybe 10.7 and 11, but you're getting them both. That's a pretty big proposition against the lower DK cap. 10% of Wemby on DK, 10% of Sabonis. So we got a little bit less of Sabonis relative to the DK field, but we got him more on DraftKings than we did on FanDuel. We got a lot less of Julius Randle relative on DraftKings than we did on FanDuel. He's power forward only on FanDuel. He picks up center eligibility on DraftKings. Doesn't really help him. Did land right around the field, though. That's it's a share that tells me I do want him. But most of those, I would guess, fall into the power forward rather than the center spot. Chet, we've talked about. Gobert, significantly below the field. That's not nothing as far as the share goes, 12.67%, but well below the field on Rudy Gobert on DK. I like him a little bit better where we got him 16% and kind of level with the field on FanDuel. Still not a terrible investment, but just scores better on FanDuel. Joe Val, he'll have his days as a value play, 68, 69 across sites, 1.20 FanDuel points, 1.21 DraftKings points per minute last year. We got him just 2%. That's slightly below the field. He doesn't look like, and he's probably pulling single-digit ownership on both sites, 7% on FanDuel, level with the field. As a differentiator, it's not a completely terrible guy, but with such monstrous upside and ceiling potential from a couple of these guys at the center spot on FanDuel specifically, I question the utility in Joe Val today. I think he's playable, but not ideal. I think he deserves to be 10% max, 10, 12, if you want to get carried away to cross 150 lineups. Is he a viable dart for like one lineup if you're a one lineup builder? In a large GPP, yeah. Just as a core differentiation piece that does have a 30-plus median and does have significant per minute upside. So he's not off the board even for one lineup builders. But again, he's coming up just level with the field on FanDuel with sub 10% exposure in our top 150. So you're really thinning things out. Make sure that you're getting one of the other superstars into that lineup to make up the ceiling gap between Joe Val and Jokic. Naz Reid, 46%. Derek Lively, 18%. We talked about Reid a little bit already when we were breaking down the forwards, but just again, 5.31 value rating, massive share. And Derek Lively, 18% on FanDuel, same 5.31 rating. He's center only, but you could put those pieces together if you wanted to go value, center, and power forward, and then build up toward the guard spots. Perfectly viable way to approach it on the FanDuel slate. On DK, the ownership reversed for those guys. It's 18.67. It's almost exactly the same, but in a different order. 18.67 level with the field for Nas. 42% of Derek Lively above the field by a pretty significant margin. Horford, we talked about. Danny Gafford pulling a little bit on DraftKings, 12.6, but that looks like it's below the field. Field's probably 15-ish. And then literally nobody else. So that's pretty stark. Everybody up here got at least a little bit. Lowest man on that in that group was Chet Holmgren. And then nobody below Danny Gafford got involved at all. You do have Collins there on an 18-minute projection. You've got Alex Sarr there with power forward and center eligibility and, potentially low-end value mark for 6,000 if the limited upside until we really get to know what's there. Cornette maybe picks up a little bit of potential upside in the fourth quarter and with some missing pieces for Boston. So maybe you see him trend a little bit more upward, but again, zeros across the board down there. And no real significant outlier on FanDuel either. We got a little bit of Sarr, we got a little bit of Cornette, and that's it. So the center spot, somewhat straightforward today. Good mix of the big men, power forward and center spots. I'm going to pull up the Ace Mine window. That was the Sims that ran for this. I think something with my output didn't build the table correctly on FanDuel. Let me see if it rebuilds it if I pull it up. Oh, good. It built. Perfect. I think it maybe spun out because I was running the DK one at the same time. But we've got it now. So we'll take a quick look at what some of these lineups actually looked like that were created, the numbers that we just looked at. And then I'm going to punch out so that I can get football updated and get 540 already. Cool. This is going to be fun. Not a bad top line up there. Chris Paul creeping into the guard spot. That's a lot of the value guys that we talked about. You can see that the purchasing power that it has, getting to a Tatum and Luka combination. But you're dealing with a number of just kind of spot fillers in there that aren't like true ceiling guys. Next lineup down has Tatum and Jokic in it. And again, filling in with some of those value types. But you do get Drew over here as a realistic guy. Russ is, again, a decent enough point per minute guy, but I really don't know what it looks like in that situation in Denver. Nas definitely explosive per minute upside. The center spot, some Jokic, some Wemby through here, but an appreciable mix of the Livelies and so on in the world. This is only 20 lineups. And then does look like we're getting a decent number of pay up util spot. That's just a matter to some degree of where these drop in. Like if this lineup had just put Jokic there and Lively there, I wouldn't be saying that. But there is room, it looks like, for multiple stars. And these, if I had to put a label on these kind of lineups that we're eyeballing here, these are definitely very Starsy Scrubsy versus balanced lineups. This one's interesting down here. Tatum, Chet, Pritchard, Doncic with Sohan, Brown, Champagny, and Monk. That is, Pritchard, Monk, Champagny, Brown, and Sohan are five guys I am not entirely comfortable saying that all five of those guys are going to be fine tonight. That is a lot of just, hey, we're filling spots with value guys, and they need to provide a little upside here, but that's the way it's coming up. This one's a little bit more balanced maybe. You get Drew, Ant, you do have Brown and Sohan in here. You get Lively in there, but you get Kyrie, and you also get Sabonis with Lou Dort in there, who's not a great per-minute player, but at least projects decently in an upside game. Does look like they get a little more balanced as we're scrolling down here. But let this fill your head with ideas for builds on DraftKings. Just putting some numbers on it. Bring back like $100 a piece on the top end there. This was against the 27,000 entry field. So it depends on what tournament you're playing, obviously. Popping over to FanDuel against the 26,000 entry field. A lot of Caruso. A lot of Caruso in here. Good amount of Julius Randle. Should be coming up through some of the power forwards. Looks like he got into some of the top ones. I like seeing Jokic in that top overall lineup and several of the top performers overall. Makes me feel good about my instinct that he would be my center choice. Wemby making a few of these. Sabonis making a few of them in the center spot. We do have a few Nazes in center, which I'm kind of surprised by in these top lineups. Putting a value-oriented PJ and then a Julius in there. That's a really balanced construction. Like, look at this lineup. Jamal, Chris Paul, Kyrie, Caruso, Alexander Walker, Tatum, Randall, Washington, Reed. There are a couple value types in there, but that's a fairly balanced construction because it stays away from Jokic at the top end. We're not going to see like any SGA in here because he barely came up in the top 150. I think there's one in here because of his 11,000 something price tag. But there's a lot of Luka on the board. There's a lot of Jokic on the board. Should be a good amount of Jason Tatum in here. We've mentioned him a couple times already. Yeah, Brown and Tatum coming up a fair amount through the middle here. So small forward, you're getting a decent shot at Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Anthony Edwards, and then a value guy. FanDuel construction, you see this a lot where it's, value guy, pay up guy, value guy, pay up guy as you go through the positions. Looks like that's fairly consistent with most of these on FanDuel. Or at the point guard, rather. Value, pay up. And then like a Chris Paul, Peyton Pritchard is like a mid and a value. Derek White, Malik Monk, kind of the same thing. None of them really look like they're consistent dual pay-ups. I would say the spot we'll probably see that is like, this one, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Might be putting a lot of weight in a blowout on that side, though. I love both the players as individuals, but putting them both maybe stretches it a little. Yeah, like a Kyrie Clay pairing there. Kyrie AE, Anthony Edwards. Yeah, pretty mixed bag of where the values land and where the stars land. And mostly it's going like 1-1 across each of the positions. And then a high-end center. Not sure what the conversation is there, but what Power just said at the bottom there, if we're talking about cost, could you play Pritchard over Koulibaly or even Nah? Sure. Yeah, I think there's upside there and similar. Not crazy upside, or not crazy downside, rather. Anyway, 5:47 on the clock, guys. I got football coming up. I got to get the projections updated, take care of a couple absences, make sure everything's on point, update the dashboard so we're talking about the correct stats. Come on back. 6:30, maybe 6:45. Just keep an eye on notifications. Subscribe if you can. Actually, probably 6:45. We'll look at sim results. We'll look at top plays for the showdown slate tonight for football. Pretty interesting game. Definitely, one of the more appealing Thursday games that we've had. So we'll be talking about that at 6:45-ish. So come on back for that. Meanwhile, good luck out there tonight. Somebody go win something. And come on back tomorrow for we'll be doing this all again for NBA. See ya.